Drones, snipers, and an escape plan all were discussed via encrypted online chats about a planned attack on the UFC event at the White House. What we know about the arrests and the anti-government motivations. The Iran war, Georgia redistricting, that's to come next year, and more dismantling of the Department of Education. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock joins us, OG style, at the Dubliner restaurant near Capitol Hill. $200 million, then $400 million, now $600 million, the ballooning cost of the White House ballroom. Guess what? The Washington Post found documents showing the contractor expects taxpayers, that's you, to pay up to $300 million to finish the job. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Let's face it, these are dangerous times. Rhetoric, weapons, encrypted places where plotters can recruit and assume they can hide. All appear present and more than mildly alarming in a plot thwarted by federal law enforcement to attack the UFC fights on the south lawn of the White House. 5 suspects thus far have been arrested. They face an array of federal charges, up to and including conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence, of course, will be tested in court, but affidavits today allege the plot envisioned drone attacks to force spectators from the White House South Lawn into public spaces, where snipers would then, it is alleged, attack. The motives? Diffuse. Opposition to billionaires, suspicion of a Jeffrey Epstein cover-up, hostility to data centers, hostility to U.S. support for Israel, hunger for anti-government revolution. Matt Quinn, Deputy Director of the Secret Service, spoke to reporters today at a separate incident here in Washington.
Look, it was a serious threat. We take all threats of a large nature very seriously, and we investigate them until we can validate 100% that it's no longer a threat. It was an active plot, and it's ongoing.
Investigators got a tip from a family member of one of the suspects charged. That head start allowed federal agents to get their arms around the plot and beef up security. Canceling the UFC event was, we are told, never seriously considered.
I'm not going to comment on reality or realism of being able to carry it out. What I'll tell you is we're going to take every threat on its face. If you say you're going to do it, we're going to believe you until we can prove otherwise.
This is a multi-layered story, and it is still unfolding. For what we know at this hour, let me bring in Justice Department reporter Jake Rosen. So, Jake, what do we know?
Well, we know that 5 people are currently in federal detention and custody as a result of this plot, which seemed to come together in the last couple of months, but really in the last week or so. About a week and a half ago, these group members who met on TikTok originally, then shifted to Signal and then to another different messaging app, all started to discuss what they would do to move and, quote, jumpstart, in the words of one of these men in a message, the crisis in the United States, to amplify the failures of President Trump and to
create maybe a second revolution in their terminology.
And we've seen this over a number of attacks in the U.S. in the last couple of months. It's to accelerate whether it is a race war or potential future problems between political parties. An event like this, built for America's 250th celebration, no matter what you think of actually having the event.
Basically, a crisis in government of some kind that would dislodge a lot of other energy and maybe bring the whole thing down.
Exactly. And what we know is that there was enough action taken in this plan that, at least for one of these men, whose name is Tyson Proper, he lived in Ohio, his parents reported him to federal law enforcement.
That was the tip.
That was the main tip that set all of this off. Eventually, because of homicidal tendencies, quoting law enforcement, this man was eventually committed to a hospital where federal law enforcement investigated him, talked to him, and went through his phone. From what we know across all different 5 documents that are, for now, the initial charging documents against these men, there was a plan to, in at least 4 tiers, have people be in the active line of fire, caught causing this damage, have drone operators within the city limits somehow, if they could get drones to fly in D.C., which, as we know, the Secret Service and the police here in Washington make it very difficult for any private drone to be flying around any kind of these events. Then a, quote, underground railroad of people to get these people out of the city.
An extrication plan.
An extrication process, and then a support network of influencers and funders, and they said even potentially journalists, to move these people and create a narrative around the kind of event of what they wanted. In all the different FBI searches across the country that we saw, there was weaponry found, guns, ammunition, tactical gear, and tactical vests. However, what we don't know, Major, is how far this group got into actually getting those drones that would have been at the heart of the attack. And really the most scary part, as we consider Americans and what warfare looks like going forward, or a domestic terror attack, there was really only just discussion about getting access to these drones and an explosive device to pair them up, but really a striking scene, especially given the last couple of months of conflict here in D.C.
And law enforcement has a terminology, howlers, people who talk a big game. Clearly there was enough, they thought, in this conversation to suggest that they were contemplating something with enough specificity that this was chargeable.
Yeah, and it was. And we saw Matt Quinn, who's the deputy director of the Secret Service, say as much today. That, and I think when you read through the rest of this, what we saw was enough movement in this space in the last couple of days where they had picked the event as this UFC event as the thing. They had seen other movement to come to the U.S., a rallying point in Virginia for everybody to meet up with each other and then go deploy themselves across the city. In some of these screenshots from Signal that Tyson Proper showed law enforcement, there were specific locations around D.C. that were circled on documents and maps that were sent to this 19-person group. We also know there's a little bit of fractionalization. There were some smaller groups of 4 or 5 people about what specific plans were. So how close they got to actually having something concrete and actionable is really irrelevant here because of just the threat nexus that we're seeing around the country and just bringing this amount of people to D.C. as we've seen over the last couple of months. President Trump, despite having the threats against his life, the attempted assassinations, still willing to bring big crowds to D.C. And we know that he's planning to bring another big rally to the National Mall next couple of months. And the same kind of threat or action plan could be potentially brought there too, right? Causing a distraction, causing an incident to happen, and then finding a way to get people, whether they're the lawmakers that were being targeted for any number of reasons, or just high-profile individuals, and causing this kind of chaos that these people specifically wanted to cause.
Dangerous times indeed. Jake Rosen, appreciate it very much. President Trump spent the second day of the G7 summit touting an initial agreement to end the war with Iran. It's a memorandum, a framework, lots of different terminology. The text, though, well, nobody's seen it. The president says he's going to hold a press conference later this week and may, at that press conference, read what has been described by Vice President J.D. Vance as a 1.5-page memorandum of understanding. He might read it, that is to say, the president, word for word. We'll stay tuned on all that. But there are still plenty of questions hanging around the agreement, its intent, and its enforceability. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us from Geneva, which is about an hour away from where the summit is being conducted in France. Nancy, summarize what we've learned today.
Well, what we've learned today, Major, is that President Trump is very sensitive to suggestions that this agreement involves any U.S. government dollars going to Iran. He repudiated that over and over again today in some of his public events. He said there are no U.S. dollars that are going to be used to help Iran rebuild, even if Iran meets some of the nuclear benchmarks that are going to be set out for it. The reason, of course, that there are questions about what exactly is in this document is because, as you pointed out, we haven't seen it. And something remarkable that we witnessed today was that even a lot of congressional Republicans are unwilling to express their support for this agreement because they said, quite frankly, they don't know what's in it. It hasn't been shown to them, just like it hasn't been shown to most of the world. And so they are going to withhold their views on it. They say they're hopeful. They're very glad that hostilities appear to be drawing to a close. But as far as the president's central claim that he made once again today, repeatedly, that this agreement is going to prevent Iran from ever getting a nuclear weapon, which is a very big and bold claim, the entire world, including Congress, including a lot of the diplomats here on Lake Geneva, they're all watching to see how exactly this agreement will accomplish that.
Nancy, on this program, we have described the battle in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah as the second front of this war, but it may be the main one right now, because today there was plenty of conversation about what this memorandum of understanding does or doesn't say about the future of Lebanon and whether the Israelis are on board with what the U.S. government intends.
And one thing that the President of the United States and Iranian leaders appear to agree on is that if there is ongoing fighting in Lebanon, Major, that could threaten the signing and implementation of this agreement. The Iranians said, hey, Lebanon is covered by this agreement. The fact that the Israelis and Hezbollah fighters are firing at one another violates the agreement. And President Trump really unloaded on the Israeli Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, in a way that we have not seen him do in public before. He said that that Israel's attacks on Beirut in particular were too vicious, in his words. He said he's not happy with the way that Israel has been going after Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon. He said they should leave the job to Syria. Instead, he argued that you don't need to bring down an entire apartment building just to get a couple of fighters. I mean, he went on and on, unloading on the Israelis at the same time that he was praising the Iranians, saying that they were very easy to work with. It was really sort of a, upside down world when you have the President of the United States saying that Iranian leaders are great and that he's got big problems with Israel.
That would be filed under jarring diplomatic language. Nancy Cordes from Geneva, thank you very much. On that point, CBS News national security contributor Joe Zaks joins me now, former Deputy Assistant Director for Counterterrorism at the CIA. Joe, always great to have you here. Let's pick up on that. What the president said today, the Iranians are reasonable, we've got a good deal, and the Israelis are vicious, and they are going overboard in Lebanon. How do you read all that?
Well, I think what it shows is that the president wants out, and the administration is ready to put Iran behind it. And I think what is going to be very important, as Nancy suggested in her piece, is for us as American citizens to see the actual agreement, and certainly for Congress to see the agreement. There's a lot
more and more Republicans are saying Congress needs to have a say about what this thing actually reads as.
Well, that's certainly what you hear from many members of Congress, and there are rumors that this may be ratified by the UN Security Council, and you would think that our Congress would see the agreement before the UN Security Council. Having said that, there's a lot of speculation right now as to what the agreement says, and that's why I think it's important for everyone to see the agreement, because it may be better than some of the speculation suggests. The terms, though, that are out there do seem that it may leave a good bit to be desired. Certainly doesn't seem to address anything related to drones, ballistic missiles, proxies. In fact, it seems to be going the other way with respect to proxies by allowing Iran, the Iranian regime, to strengthen its position and its proxy Hezbollah. So we do need to see what is written.
What's in the fine print?
And I think that ultimately what will be interesting is, do we have any stomach to enforce what is behind this MOU, and especially this supposed 60 days agreement or negotiations on the nuclear file? What I suspect is very likely to happen is that, in fact, the Iranian regime drags this out and drags this out.
And the United States loses focus, moves on to other things.
Moves forces out of the area.
Moves forces out of the areas. And then what's the
enforcement mechanism? Exactly.
What's the sum total of all this?
Exactly. Well, we will see. Before seeing what was agreed to, I really want to be careful in passing judgment and want to give the administration all the benefit of the doubt. But on the other hand, the details are
Before
important.
I let you go, Joe, do you find it any way interesting? Look, the administration has the text. It could release it.
Right.
Does it appear to you reluctant, and does that reluctance in any way unnerve you or trouble you?
Well, I think that it's a mistake not to release it. I mean, the president is saying that maybe it'll be released. Maybe he'll read it during a press conference in the coming days, or that it'll be released on Friday in conjunction with the signing ceremony. But the bottom line is it's been signed. And so
that's what we've been told.
So we've been told. So I think that the better part of valor is, in fact, to release it and let at least our citizens see it. Right.
Explain what it is.
Exactly. That would be my recommendation.
You heard it, Mr. President. That's Joe's recommendation. Joe Zacks, I appreciate the time, as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Voters in 4 states and Washington, D.C. heading to the polls today. California, Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia are holding primary elections and runoffs. Republicans in Georgia will decide nominees for governor and a Senate seat. And that's where we find, that is to say, Georgia, CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry in Atlanta. Skylar, take it away.
Major, lots to take away here and a lot to peel back, if you will, to use the metaphor here in Georgia, a Vidalia onion filled with layers in terms of storylines, so to speak. Let's start with the Senate race. What we have here is the newly minted, so to speak, endorsed candidate, Congressman Mike Collins, who has for a long time run in lockstep with the president, certainly gained some notoriety passing that Lake and Riley Act a couple of years ago, and someone who for a long time has run on an incredibly conservative record. Many wondered whether the president would weigh into this race at all, especially considering the fact that he had remained relatively quiet up until his birthday, literally 1 o'clock in the morning, putting out this endorsement for Collins, calling him both a winner and warrior. And he also took a jab at Collins' competition, and that is the former Tennessee University football coach Derek Dooley, saying that Dooley didn't participate in the 2016 election, the 2020 election for that matter. And, you know, the president is someone who values loyalty, and so I think it'll be interesting to see how much juice, so to speak, the president's endorsement will have, especially considering that early voting had already wrapped by the time he put out his endorsement, and whether that will have any sort of trickle effect to voters here on Election Day, which we should point out is a relatively soggy one that could impact turnout to a certain extent. As for the gubernatorial race, interesting there. We have the Lieutenant Governor, Burt Jones, who has had the endorsement from President Trump for quite some time. He actually recently got the endorsement from the current Republican Governor, Brian Kemp, as well. And this is a race, I think, that could very well do that thing that we've seen in this primary cycle in terms of the outsider versus the long-established politician, so to speak. With Jones, he is someone who has aligned himself with President Trump on a range of issues. Meanwhile, the billionaire Rick Jackson is who he is going up against. Jackson earning the endorsement of Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who was here in the Atlanta area yesterday, stumping alongside him, as well as Florida Senator Rick Scott as well, all of whom throwing their support behind him. Should be interesting. He's backed up the Brinks truck, so to speak, more than $100 million of his own money in terms of campaigning. So we'll see what happens when polls close here tonight.
Brinks trucks and Vidalia onions. Only Skylar Henry can put them all together in the same live shot. I appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much. Still to come on the Takeout. Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock on today's Peach State election, Supreme Court voting rights rulings, and the midterm political climate. And if you are a first-time homebuyer, in some states you face nothing but sticker shock. $1 million or more for the first home in 242 cities. That's basically the opening bid. Senior economist from Zillow explains. Plus, a new report says President Trump's White House ballroom could cost $600 million, with half the bill going to taxpayers. The Washington Post has the documents. Takeout returns in 90 seconds. Welcome back to the Takeout. The Washington Post reported today the White House ballroom could cost as much as $600 million. You remember the original estimate was $200 million. And the president has stated over and over again, taxpayers would not spend, in his terminology, a dime on this project, and that it would be funded completely either by him or private donors or some combination of both. The Post, however, found documents revealing that taxpayers could be on the hook for as much as half of that new $600 million cost estimate. Joining us now, Sarah Blasky, investigative reporter at the Washington Post, and she'll break the story. Sarah, what do you know?
Thank you so much for having me on. What we've learned through documents that the Washington Post obtained was that the ballroom, price of the ballroom, and the sort of subsequent and underground facility, all of this together, the new East Wing project, originally was, as you said, was supposed to be about $200 million. And these documents that range from July of 2025 to March of 2026 showed the price sort of increasing over time. These documents in March have the estimated total price for the construction of that new East Wing at $600 million, 300 million of which is supposed to come from taxpayers through the US Secret Service or the White House military office. So that is obviously a lot more than we have been told publicly, than the president has said publicly. The most I believe the president has said up to this point that this structure would cost is $400 million. That was up from that original $2. And of course, as you pointed out, publicly, he has stated that this would not cost taxpayers a dime. But these internal documents, which were created by the contractor, the construction contractor on the project, and provided to the White House as sort of updates along the way of this project, tell this other story.
And that's really important. And I want to zero in on what you just mentioned, Sarah, because in Washington, reporters have a terminology. People can say lots of things, but find it on paper. Find it on a piece of paper. And what we have here are documents from Clark Construction, the contractor who's doing this work and seeking compensation for the work, telling the White House how much it's going to cost and envisioning how it's going to be paid for. So this is all on paper. That's right. And it's important to note that Clark Construction didn't create these documents in a vacuum. These are a representation of a collaborative process between the contractor, Clark Construction, and the White House and the staff within the White House who are in charge of overseeing this project. And so this is not a, pulled out of thin air number. This is something that reflects bi-weekly conversations between the White House administrative staff and Clark Construction officials. And, as the price goes up, that reflects a change in the scope of the project, a change in the size or the materials or what have you, or the length of time that they're expecting the structure and the construction to take. And so all of that is accounted for in these, think of them as status reports, really, summaries of the expected price of the project as it has been agreed upon in that moment. Sarah Blasky, investigative reporter with the Washington Post, with the documents, the explanation, and, quite obviously, the inherent contradictions. Appreciate your time very much. Thank you. Coming up, my conversation with Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia. He weighs in on the Supreme Court's voting rights decisions and a lot more. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Raphael Warnock is a Democratic senator from Georgia. He's been that since 2021. Since 2005, he's been the senior pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, a very famous church in the civil rights movement. Warnock has a new book out discussing, from a sort of scriptural point of view, issues facing the United States. It is called The Crooked Places Made Straight, Reflections on the Moral Meaning of America. I spoke with Senator Warnock about that and much more at the Dubliner. That's a restaurant near Capitol Hill. So let's start with the Iran war. What's been announced? What's your perspective on what you've heard so far from the president?
Well, I hope that at last this war, a little over 100 days over, is over. I hope the war is over. But the question is, why were we in the war in the first place? We've spent nearly $1 billion a day. The Strait of Hormuz, they're saying, will be reopened. Well, it was open before we started the war. And we are a long way from what Donald Trump promised and what it looks like he's going to deliver. It looks a lot like where we were before any of this started.
Does the Senate need to approve whatever has been agreed to, this memorandum of understanding, the framework, whatever it's being called?
If it is to be sustainable, And that's the whole point of an agreement. It needs to come through the Congress. The decision to take us to war in the first place should have come through the Congress. And so I think it's past time for Congress to assert itself. I am heartened that I've heard a few Republicans say that it ought to come through the Congress. Because we don't, these things need to be sustainable over time, so that all the parties that are a part of the agreement can take some comfort in that. But it's also the reason why I am introducing my own war powers resolution today, because the declaration of war in the first place is clearly within the purview of the Congress. This president has run roughshod over that. He's taken us into an illegal war. It spiked gas prices. And if you look geopolitically, China has done it pretty good as a result of this war. Russia, because of the spike in gas prices, is doing better, even as they wage war against Ukraine. This has not been good for America or its credibility in the world.
Are we safer?
I don't think so.
Why not?
No. Well, you have the issue with the enriched uranium. That has not been addressed. We don't know how it's going to be addressed, if it's going to be addressed. Listen, President Trump walked into office, and we had an agreement already with the Obama agreement.
Which he canceled and got out of.
Which he canceled. He never explained why he wanted to get out of it. And
said it was a bad deal.
It was the worst deal in the world. Well, we'll see where we land on Friday. But by all reporting, the regime is clearly still in place. The stickier issues regarding Iran and its ability to get a nuclear weapon, which it cannot have. There's no evidence that the details around that have been worked out. He's gotten the strait reopened. Well, the strait was open before he started the war. And the regime is very much in place, and it seems like the folks who've stepped up are even more hardline than their predecessors.
Let's talk about some Georgia politics. First thing, it's primary day in Georgia, statewide runoffs. And also, as I understand it, Senator, the legislature will meet, I think, tomorrow to begin consideration of redrawing district lines in Georgia for 2028. Give me a read on both.
Well, on the gerrymandering issue, this is a dark moment in our country and in the effort to have a multiracial democracy. The Supreme Court did a lot of damage to our electoral system. They gave a license to southern states to take us back to a time that feels more like 1956 than 2026. And what we're seeing is governors, state legislatures all across the South come back into session in order to draw the lines in such a way as to give craven politicians an outsized voice, allowing them to pick their voters rather than the voters picking the people who will represent them. I mean, think about that. This is election season. Election season is about the voters picking their representatives. And what we're witnessing right now is politicians working overtime as a result of this horrible decision to pick their voters.
So let's talk about the Supreme Court for a second. Is it your point of view, Senator, that the Supreme Court gave up on the idea of a multiracial democracy, or it went back to the Constitution, which did not envision it in the first place?
We are seeing a Supreme Court that is an extreme court. They are behaving as partisan hacks in many respects. And this has been going on for a while.
You know what I'm getting at, though? The Constitution did not envision what came out of the Civil Rights Movement, okay? The Civil Rights Movement had to create a different reality. So is the Supreme Court going back to the original interpretation of the Constitution? Meaning that it did not envision a multiracial democracy.
True. No, that's true. Look, Thomas Jefferson said that, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with their creator, with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Words that Dr. King called sublime words of cosmic proportions, he says. But he was a slaveholder. And that is the complicated history of the American family story as we approach this 250th anniversary.
Right.
But the beauty and power is that they put those sublime words on paper. And the story of America is to work to get the country to live up to its ideals. So no, black people weren't among, when he said all men, he didn't mean all. And when he said men, he only meant men. So thank God for the civil rights movement. Thank God for the women's suffrage movement. The process of becoming a multiracial democracy where everybody has a voice has been just that, a process, and they're moving us backwards.
The Supreme Court is.
The Supreme Court is moving us backwards. They are enabling Donald Trump and his partners in Congress to diminish the voices of the people who I think are well poised to hold them accountable.
What effect will that have in Georgia? Is that firing your people up?
I think it is. Absolutely. I think this is a case.
So when you look at the governor's race and the Senate race, what a practical political effect on the ground do you think that has?
As I move around Georgia, ordinary people are very upset by this. And I think, you know, when you try to diminish people's voices, they don't take kindly to that. And I've seen it up close in my own races. When I ran for re-election in Georgia, they looked at the anatomy of my victory and they came after it with surgical precision. They changed the rules around the runoff, and just as we were going into the runoff, I'd already won in the earlier runoff for my initial election. They said, well, you can't vote the first weekend of the runoff. And they offered some misinterpretation of an old Georgia law. The officials in Georgia said our hands are tied because they understood how the voters in my coalition show up. So they tried to cut them off at the path. They said their hands were tied, and so I decided to untie their hands. I sued them. And then the folks who said their hands were tied then went and appealed the decision rather than focusing on setting up the infrastructure so people could vote. I had to win 2 appeals just so people could vote the first weekend of that election. 70,000 people voted that weekend, including college students who were home for the Thanksgiving weekend. I won by 100,000 votes. They are playing games with people's voices.
And when those, in your words, games get played, it creates a backlash or a fire effect.
Evil always goes too far.
Senator made reference to a war powers resolution that failed on a vote of 47 to 48 in the Senate. There were 5 Senate absences. You can catch my full conversation with Senator Raphael Warnock on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. Still ahead. Remember when J.D. Vance called Kamala Harris and other Democratic women childless cat ladies? Well, he has some reaction in the rear view about that. We'll have that when we come back. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. The dream of home ownership, well, it comes with a price. And in some cities, it's a steep price. Zillow found a record 242 cities in America have starter homes valued at more than $1 million. California has the most of these cities, 105 in total. But New York and New Jersey, well, they're doing their best to catch up. They're seeing very fast growth in this area. Now, Zillow defines a starter home as one in the lowest third of home values in that area. Joining me now is Orphe Divounguy. He's a senior economist at Zillow. Orphe, we are fascinated by this story at a couple of levels. One is the trend line. According to your data, in 2020, 80 cities hit this 1 million starter home valuation. Now it's 242. What has driven that trend line?
Yeah, it's fundamentally a supply story. You know, that's what underbuilding looks like in slow motion. When you don't build enough, prices get pushed up at every level, including the entry level. We've had a housing deficit that's a decade in the making that collided with the kind of increase in residential mobility that we saw during the pandemic, right? That surge in people moving due to historic low mortgage rates. And so that pushed up prices and rents, right? In markets where new construction responded, where we saw a big surge in supply, right? Some of the southern markets, prices cooled. In other markets like the Northeast and the West Coast, the squeeze remains.
And let's get to the other side of this story, because your data also talks about prices elsewhere. What, on average, does a starter home cost in America?
Yeah, for context, I think I think that's a good idea. The national typical starter home is about $200,000, which pencils out to about $1,300 a month. You know, if you add taxes and insurance. But in San Jose, a starter home sets you back nearly $1 million, right? Roughly $5,000 a month. In the Birmingham metro, you're paying about $610 a month, right? So, you know, it varies across the country, but you'll notice that the most expensive cities to own a starter home are in the Northeast, places that, you know, markets that really don't build a lot of housing. Historically, in the Northeast, in the New York metro, you have Suffolk and Nassau County feature some of the most expensive starter homes. And it's not just the Hamptons, it's also right Nassau County, it's Manhasset, it's Cold Spring Harbor. In New Jersey, you have places like Orange County and Bergen County where, you know, they basically top that expensive list. And so it's kind of spread out, but it's really the Northeast, that region that just historically doesn't build a lot of housing and where you're seeing price growth and rent growth remain stubbornly elevated.
But part of my audience, Orfe, might say to themselves, well, I guess Texas is in the clear, South Carolina, Wyoming. No. To 2020, Texas had 0 in this $1 million starter home category. Now it has 7 cities. South Carolina had 0 in 2020. Now it has 3. Wyoming had 0 in 2020. Now it has 2 cities. So it's not just a coastal problem.
That's right. It's all over the country, right? It's, you know, people moved during the pandemic. You saw prices increase rapidly. Now you'll see that in our data as of last year, price growth started to cool, right? And the cooling came from a big surge in housing supply that we saw during the pandemic. We had a 50-year high increase in the number of homes started, right? So during the pandemic, and that helped, right? So the big increase in supply helped to cool price growth. So prices are rising at a more moderate pace than they did during the pandemic in some of those markets. You know, you're looking at a market like Austin, Texas, for example, where prices actually were falling for the last 2 years, right? Coming back down to earth. And I think that's going to help, right? So there's some good news here. Mortgage affordability is has improved a little bit over the past year. But yes, prices remain high.
And there's always this conversation, Orfe, about what are interest rates, and that's an important part of anyone's calculation for a mortgage. But as I read your data, it's also about the regulatory environment and what jurisdictions decide to do or not to do by themselves to increase housing supply.
That's right. There's not much we can do about mortgage rates. You know, mortgage rates are fluctuating around the current level, 6.5% or so, right? The good news, they're 30 to 40 basis points below where they were last year. That's good. That's going to help some people. That's going to help everybody in the housing market right now. But ultimately, you know, local governments control, you know, building restrictions, land use restrictions, right? Where you can build, how you can build, minimum parking requirements. All of those things add cost to builders that basically keep them on the sidelines, right? During the pandemic, what did we see? We saw that when things got unaffordable, in markets with the fewest building restrictions, builders continued to build housing, and that helped to moderate price growth. You saw that in Texas. You see, looking at Austin, Texas, you see big decline in home values. San Antonio, same thing. Dallas market, big decline in home values that actually helped to affordability somewhat. In other markets where you did not see the big increase in housing supply that we saw in some of those Texas markets, price growth remains stubbornly high. And that is the main issue here, right? So loosening building regulations and land use restrictions to allow builders to continue to build more housing, to allow builders to lean into density, townhomes, building townhomes and condos so we can get more people into homes is how we're going to fix this affordability challenge over the long run.
Orfe Divounguy, senior economist, Zillow. I appreciate the time very much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
A new report written by Republicans finds the GOP has gained an edge in the midterms from redistricting. Just because Republicans wrote it doesn't mean it's wrong. Our political panel will dissect it when we come back. You're watching The Takeout. Welcome back. Get excited. Political panel time. Let me introduce them. Republican strategist, friend of the show, Kevin Sheridan. Democratic strategist, also friend of the show, Ola Lethe. Okay, there's a graphic control and bring it up about redistricting. Let's try to net this out. So the National Republican Congressional Committee wrote this memo. It said, going after redistricting all over the country, There are 23 House seats that Democrats must defend that Trump won in 2024, which is different than when this cycle began. There were 13 seats Democrats had to defend that Trump won in 2024, a net gain of 10. Kevin, you've been on this program before suggesting, if not predicting, that this would all sort of wash out and not be a net gain for Republicans. Do you have a different evaluation of that now based on this memo?
It looks like Republicans have the slight edge in the redistricting battles that they have.
Now that all the dust is
simply
more or less
because
settled.
there were so many more targets for Republicans to go after. Democrats had already done this in New England and other blue states a long time ago. There's no Republicans there anymore. So they had more of an opportunity to do it. And the generic ballot question right now, R versus D, is only about 5.7 points right now, I think, in the Real Clear. So
Democrat advantage.
Democrat advantage. That number, you would think, given the environment we're in, given gas prices and everything else that's going on, and the president's approval number overall, that number would be 10, 15, more than that. So Republicans, that plus redistricting, they have a chance.
Mo, do they have a chance?
You don't look. I stopped making predictions
long ago
when Donald Trump came down the escalator. Look, I think this is the Republican analysis is a more optimistic one for Republicans than I have seen. Other nonpartisan analyses show them maybe picking up 5 to 6 through redistricting, not 10. So I guess that helps them a little bit, and they need that help because most independent analyses also show that there are about 20 plus competitive Republican-held districts right now. Democrats only need a net gain of 3.
Right. The current majority, 217 to 212 with 5 vacancies in the House. So it's very narrow. So the Democrats don't need to win 20 net seats to get the majority.
So there are more opportunities for Democrats right now. There are more roads to the majority for Democrats right now than they are for Republicans. So it makes sense that they'd be touting this analysis, even if it is overly optimistic, because it's not.
How much stock, Mo, as a professional in this space, do you put in special election results? Because Democrats have been outperforming 2024 in these special elections. Do you put a lot of stock in that or not?
They're not predictive, but they're important that you can learn some stuff from them. What's interesting, for example, is Texas, where Democrats overperformed in districts in special elections after the Republicans redistricted to make them more friendly seats for them. Democrats still overperform. So there's reasons for Democrats to be optimistic, but let's not make any predictions.
So when we think about whether or not J.D. Vance is going to seek the Republican nomination in the presidency in 2028, when he shows up on The View, we know for a fact that he is, because you don't go there to talk to the MAGA base. You go there to talk to a potential general election.
He went everywhere today.
He went everywhere.
I mean,
We're doing a lot of the rounds.
Wall.
A lot of the rounds. But he addressed, because he was asked, childless cat lady, something that he uttered in 2024. Here's his take on it in the rear view.
But here's what I'd say about that. So did that comment actually shed light on something and start a discussion, or did it just close people down? And when I make a comment that just closes people down, instead of trying to appreciate the point that I make, that's a mistake, right? And that's on me to do better.
Okay,
because can I just say, the point that I'd say on that, Joy, is I do think, in a very subtle sometimes in a more profound way, I think our country has become more anti-family and more anti-child.
Kevin?
Hey, he admitted it was a mistake.
In World Cup terms, that's an own goal.
Yeah. Well, everybody knew that was a problematic quote when it came out, but it was kind of funny in a way. But no, he owns it. He's done the rounds. He was on literally every right, left, and center media outlet today. And I think he's going to keep doing that. And now he's the face of the Iran deal. And he's out there trying to argue for it, but we just don't know what's in that yet.
We know we don't. But Mo, he's everywhere. And what does that tell you? And what does this reaction tell you?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he went on The View, the fact that he is now apologizing or walking back a comment that he spent the better part of a year defending aggressively,
and
mocking those of us, right? Mocking anybody who had a problem with it. Now suddenly we get the mea culpa, as the kids say, hashtag he's running.
It was a partial mea culpa. It wasn't that big of a culpa.
Kevin, very quickly, do you think that J.D. Vance's positioning in and around the Iran deal will be a plus, a negative, or a toss-up?
It's very complicated because he's the skeptic on the Iran invasion in the first place, but now he's talking about the peace deal. So we'll have to see how good of a deal this really is for us. And, the Hawks are mad right now.
Right.
So maybe it helps them a little.
Not currently center stage, Marco Rubio. Maybe that's tactical. Kevin Sheridan, Mo Alethe, thank you very much. Happy Tuesday, everyone. You know what this is. Quick reminder, The Takeout. You know what we are. Quick reminder, relentlessly curious, reliably civil, occasionally clever. Daily Report, coming your way next.